dear Lord. You made many poor people. I realize, of course, it's no shame to be poor. But it's no great honor either. So what would have been so terrible if I had a small fortune?
If I were a rich man, yabba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dum, all day long I biddy-biddy-bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. Yabba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dum. If I were a biddy-biddy rich, idle-diddle-diddle-diddle man, I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the dozen right in the middle of the town. A fine tin roof with the real wooden floors below. There would be one long staircase just going up and one even longer coming down, and one more leading nowhere just for show. I'd fill my yard with the chicks and turkeys and geese and ducks for the town to see and hear, squawking just as noisily as they can. And each loud will land like a trumpet on the ear, as if to say, here lives a wealthy man. If I were a rich man, yabba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dum, all day long I biddy-biddy-bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. Yabba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dum. If I were a biddy-biddy rich, idle-diddle-diddle-diddle man, I see my wife, my gold, looking like a rich man's wife with a proper double chin, supervising meals to her heart's delight. I see her putting on airs and strutting like a peacock. Oh, what a happy mood she's in, screaming at the servants day and night. The most important man in town will come to fawn on me. They will ask me to advise them, like a Solomon the wise. If you please, Rebetavia, pardon me, Rebetavia, posing problems that would cross a rabbi's eyes. He had a need. And it won't make one bit of difference if I answer right or wrong. When you're rich, they think you really know. If I were rich, I'd have the time that I like to sit in the synagogue and pray, and maybe have a seat by the eastern wall. And I discuss the holy books with a learned man 7 hours every day. And that would be the sweetest thing of all. If I were a rich man, yabba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dum, all day long I biddy-biddy-bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. Yabba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dum. Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, you decreed I should be what I am. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan? If I were a wealthy man.
Welcome back, students, and welcome to another music lesson. Now, what we just watched was from a musical called Fiddler on the Roof. And the reason I showed you that is because it ties into the music we're learning about this week, and that music is called klezmer music. If you haven't heard of it, don't worry about that. It's not something that not everybody knows about. And the biggest example that people would recognize would be Fiddler on the Roof, which is why I showed it to you. But klezmer music has had, even though it's kind of not very well known, has had tons of influence on very well-known music, such as classical music and jazz, and even some modern pop I've heard with influences of klezmer in it. Now, another place you would probably recognize klezmer music would be at weddings. Often this happens at weddings and parties that klezmer music makes an appearance. So why don't we take a look at a wedding band playing some traditional klezmer music. Now, you may be thinking, Mr. Dooley, I've been to weddings, and I've never heard music quite like that. Well, that's because klezmer music comes from the Jewish people. So if you were to go to a Jewish wedding or a Jewish party, you may hear this. It's very popular, and it's a music that's followed their culture for a very long time. And I think before we hear and learn about some more klezmer music, we better learn a little bit more about the history and geography of where Jewish people have lived and what the history of their people are. All right, students, so let's start by you guys helping me find the traditional homeland where our earliest records show that Jewish people first lived. So let's zoom out from Soulsbyville School, because we're definitely leaving the United States for this. And we're going to try and find the country of Israel. So here's the United States. We are going to cross, once again, like we do much of the time, the Pacific Ocean. And let's see if it'll show up here. See if you can't find the country Israel. Starts with an I. If you haven't found it yet, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. I'm going to give you a big hint. We studied Egyptian music, and it's pretty close to Egypt. And that's something I want you to remember for later, because when we talk about the music, it might be a little similar. Do you see it yet? Right here. And this is roughly the area. Some of our oldest records show that the people of Israel, the Jewish people, lived. Now, I'm going to really sum this down because the history of the Jewish people is a tough one and a sad one. It's kind of like when we talked about Native Americans when we were doing the Thanksgiving one. This is a tough history, so I'm going to really condense it down. Now, basically, like 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, there's just been a lot of conquering of their homeland. So the surrounding countries would come in, conquer their homeland, burn down their temples, and the people of Israel, the Jewish people, would become refugees. Now, refugees are if you've lost your home and you need to move to a new place to start a new home. So imagine people came in and stole your home. You're now a refugee. And because of that, there's been several points in history where this happened to the Jewish people, and they've become refugees. And that means they spread across the world to make new homes for themselves. So the Jewish people had to really move out of their homeland and set up new homes around the world. In Europe, over here in Eastern Europe, and this western part of Asia, and to Russia, and eventually, once people could cross oceans, came to the United States and many other places. So the Jewish people really spread out all over the planet because of the constant conquest of their home. People would come in, take their home, they became refugees, and they had to move elsewhere to start a new life. And that's why we can find klezmer music in a lot of different places, and when you mix with different cultures from around the world, it can change and make really, really unique bits of music. And that's what happened with klezmer music. So what I'd like to see next is a little bit more of examples of klezmer music. Why don't we switch over to that? Now, a big part of klezmer music is instrumental. That means there are no singers and no lyrics. That means it's just instruments playing, so the focus is on the instrumentalists. And a lot of the times when it's instrumental music, these instrumentalists get really, really good because the focus is on them. Let's take a look at these guys. This is the Barcelona Gypsy Klezmer Orchestra. They are going to play a little bit of a klezmer song. It's just instrumental, no singer. super cool, and you can tell how good those instrumentalists are. Klezmer Music Sony, I want to show you a little bit of stuff on clarinet and violin that makes this music unique. How they play these instruments kind of gives it its style. Students, I've got my violin here because I wanted to show off a little bit of what makes klezmer music sound like klezmer music. Each genre has its own styles and scales and techniques to make it sound different from other stuff. Now, klezmer music, well, let me start by playing you something first. I'm going to play the melody from that last song we were listening to. Let me see if I can recreate it. Now, that melody, I wonder if some of you guys were thinking, that kind of sounds like the Egyptian lesson, but sped up, because a lot of that Egyptian music we're listening to was kind of slow and more meditative. Well, if you remember when we were looking on the map, looking for Israel in the beginning of this lesson, you noticed it was very close to Egypt. Remember what happens when countries are close to each other, they share culture, and that includes music. And in Israel, just like all the other Arabic states around it, have that same scale that they like to use a lot, that we learned about in the Egyptian lesson, which is the Phrygian dominant scale. Let me play it for you. And all the notes in that melody I just played are a part of that scale. Those 8 different notes right here were used in this melody. Let me slow it down, see if you can notice. Whoop. All part of that scale that we used. Another thing that klezmer musicians do to make it sound like klezmer music is they do a lot of slides and a lot of glissandos. And essentially what that means is we just slide it up and down. So on the violin, it's nice and easy. We just hold our finger down. We do that. We just bring it up on the fingerboard, which shortens the string, which makes it go higher. Now the clarinetist, a little bit harder. They're using their mouth, how tight they are on the reed to bend it up and down. They also use funny finger placements that I don't even know how to do on clarinet. That makes it bend up and down, a little more complicated on a clarinet. But that bending and glissandoing makes it sound all slinky. And I did it when I played the melody for you a second ago. See if you can hear when I bend up and down. Did you hear that? That was a bend. Did you hear it? Did you hear it? And adding in those little bends and glissandos makes it sound nice and slinky and gives it that style that klezmer music is known for. So we got glissandos and bends, which essentially mean the same thing. We bend up and down the pitch. And the Phrygian dominant scale that we learned about back in the Egyptian lesson is used a lot in klezmer music and gives it that style. And that's because they were next to each other. All those different countries that love to use that, that scale, all next to each other. They shared cultures, and that includes music. So both Egypt and Israel, when you listen to their music, often, very often use that Phrygian dominant scale. Here's a normal scale. For us, major would be like the normal scale. Here's a Phrygian dominant. A much different style and a much different feel. We have one more video I wanted to watch, or wanted to play for you guys. All right, and lastly, students, I wanted to end with a vocal song, not just instrumental, so we're going to have a singer this time. But I did also want to talk just super briefly about this group's name. It's the Barcelona Gypsy Balkan Orchestra. Now, we talked about Jewish people were refugees, and they fled to parts of Europe. And in parts of Europe, there are people called gypsies, or the Roma people, is probably a more proper name for them. And they were kind of the outcasts of society. They weren't treated well by a lot of European people. And this is the same for Jewish people as well. Often refugees are treated very poorly by the countries that they immigrate to. People who are refugees, remember, are fleeing a bad situation. Their home was taken, or it's a violent place, and they're trying to just make a new life, and history is riddled with countries treating their refugees poorly. And this is the case as well for Jewish people and for gypsies. And since they are in the same situation, they became friends, these two people. And often their music mixed. And if we listen to gypsy jazz music, it's very similar to klezmer, and that's because their two cultures mixed. Okay, history lesson over. Why don't we see some vocal klezmer music?
Boom. One, two.
Well, guys, super cool music. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you like it. I sure do. I will see you guys in the next one for a new music lesson.